In the archival fond F74385 of the National Archives of France in Paris, a notebook bound in dark leather, measuring 18 by 24 centimeters and sealed with a red wax stamp bearing the imprint of a compass and a square, is kept. According to expert paleographic analysis of the paper and the watermarks of the Canson factory, the document dates to 1781. It is the record of a closed judicial inquiry conducted by the Parisian Masonic lodge United Hearts, concerning an unauthorized duel between Captain of the Royal Guard Louis de Saint-Germain and the Chevalier Jean-Baptiste de la Tour. The document contains 14 pages of encrypted correspondence, the names and personal signatures of 6 witnesses, a detailed diagram of the meeting site in the Passy suburb, and a financial receipt for a surgeon's services amounting to 120 livres. This artifact serves as direct documentary evidence of how the closed corporate structures of the 18th century established a parallel system of justice that regulated internal conflicts among the nobility, bypassing official royal edicts and state judicial institutions. If you are interested in documentary history based on archival sources, paleographic analysis, and impartial research of facts, subscribe to the channel and like the video. This helps us conduct new research in European archives and produce large-scale historical investigations. To understand the institutional nature of Masonic duels, it is necessary to analyze the legal and social structure of Western and Central European countries from 1750 to 1790. Absolutist states, particularly France, Austria, and Prussia, waged a systematic struggle against the practice of dueling. The Royal Edict of Louis XIV from 1679, regularly reaffirmed by legal acts in 1723, 1754, and 1779, classified any duel as a grave crime against the crown and an infringement upon the monopoly of legitimate violence. The law prescribed the death penalty, confiscation of all movable and immovable property, and deprivation of noble title for participation in a duel. However, the nobility, which formed the backbone of the officer corps of the regular armies, continued to regard the estate code of honor as a key element of their social status and corporate identity. During this same historical period, there was an explosive growth of Masonic lodges. According to the preserved registers of the Grand Orient of France, by 1785 there were 629 registered lodges in the country, uniting over 30,000 active members. The social composition of the participants was distributed as follows. 42% were active and retired military officers. 35% were representatives of the hereditary nobility and the nobility of the robe. 18% were officials of the royal administration, judicial chambers and prosecutors' offices, and 5% were representatives of major guild merchants and the financial elite. A sharp institutional conflict arose. Members of the lodges were simultaneously subject to royal laws, the estate code of honor, and the internal statutes of the order. Masonic lodges functioned as sovereign corporate spaces with their own autonomous hierarchy, system of oaths, and normative base. The key document regulating the behavior of members was the internal statute and the estate statute of honor. The combination of the status of a noble officer and a member of a closed lodge created an irresolvable legal conflict. In the event of a public insult, an officer was obliged to immediately challenge the offender to a duel under threat of expulsion from the regiment for cowardice and evasion of defending honor. However, if both parties to the conflict were members of the same lodge or were in fraternal relations within the same obedience, issuing a direct challenge without prior notification to the lodge leadership grossly violated the Masonic oath. The oath taken during initiation to the master's degree included the obligation to maintain fraternal harmony, avoid shedding the blood of brothers, and unquestioningly obey the decision of the lodge's court of honor. Thus, the order attempted to establish an institutional mechanism that would neutralize the destructive consequences of duels for its internal structure, without entering into open conflict with the traditional noble concept of the inviolability of personal honor. The lodge's disciplinary system relied on a clearly regulated judicial procedure. Each Masonic obedience operated a committee of mediation and a court of honor composed of the worshipful master, the first and second wardens, the orator, and the keeper of the seal. According to the preserved 1774 charter of the Parisian lodge Leander, in the event of a quarrel or public insult between brothers, the participants were obliged to send a written notification to the master within 24 hours. Any attempt to conduct a duel without the knowledge and written sanction of the lodge leadership was punished by a severe procedure known as erasure from the columns, complete expulsion from the order, followed by the distribution of named circulars to all affiliated lodges in Europe. For an 18th-century nobleman and officer, such expulsion meant complete social cessation of existence within the privileged circles of society. The court of honor conducted a thorough investigation. It interviewed witnesses, verified the financial and personal underpinnings of the conflict, and delivered a verdict. Sanctions could include mandatory public reconciliation within the temple walls, a monetary fine for the benefit of the Widows and Orphans Fund ranging from 50 to 500 livres, or temporary suspension from participation in ritual work for a period of 3 to 12 months. The mechanics of conflict prevention in the daily life of the nobility included special ritual and communicative procedures. If a quarrel occurred in a public place, at a noble assembly, an opera house, a gambling den, or an inn, the participants might not have been aware of each other's affiliation with the order. To prevent violent escalation and immediate bloodshed, a complex system of secret signs, handshakes, and verbal passwords was used. A specific way of touching the wrist during a handshake, a particular order of uttering the password of the current degree, or displaying a Masonic ring engraved with symbols, served as a signal to immediately suspend the mundane conflict. According to preserved records from the Vienna Police Archive for 1782, there are 14 documented cases where impending duels between Austrian and Hungarian officers were cancelled directly on the dueling ground after the exchange of Masonic passwords. In such situations, the opponents immediately lowered their swords or discharged their pistols into the air, after which they submitted the disputed matter for consideration by a joint commission of their lodge masters. This demonstrates that corporate discipline and the order's oath, in a number of situations, proved stronger than class-based behavioral stereotypes. However, preventing a duel and reconciling the parties was far from always possible. In cases where the insult touched upon critical issues of personal and class honor, accusations of financial dishonesty, cheating at cards, embezzlement, direct betrayal, or an affront to the honor of women from a brother's family, the court of honor was unable to achieve reconciliation. In such situations, the lodge leadership was forced to proceed with the procedure of sanctioning a closed or forbidden duel. This process was conducted under conditions of absolute secrecy. The lodge formed a closed collegium of 3 authoritative members, appointed as seconds and arbiters. The main task of this collegium was to minimize the risk of physical annihilation of the participants and to prevent intervention by state justice authorities. The conditions of the duel were strictly limited. The use of high-precision rifled pistols was categorically prohibited. The shooting distance was increased to 30 or 35 paces, and in fencing, The fight was strictly to first blood. Any grievous bodily harm or loss of life was classified as a gross violation of the Masonic oath and entailed immediate expulsion from the order, with subsequent transfer of information to the civil authorities. The logistics and organizational support of closed duels required the highest level of secrecy. Meetings of duelists were scheduled exclusively in strictly isolated locations: private country estates, hunting lodges rented through third parties, or hard-to-reach forested areas such as the Bois de Boulogne near Paris, the parks of Versailles, or the Prater Park forest in Vienna. The timing of the meeting was strictly limited to the early morning, between 0400 and 0600, to completely avoid any crossing with patrols of the Royal Constabulary or city police. All communication between seconds and participants was conducted using encryption systems. The so-called Masonic cipher, based on a combination of rectangular and cross-shaped grids with dot fill, as well as polyalphabetic substitution ciphers, were employed. Correspondence was delivered exclusively by personal couriers from among the brothers of junior degrees who had taken a special oath of silence. Orders, challenges, and seconds protocols never contained real names. Instead, symbolic order pseudonyms and lodge registration numbers were used. All documentation related to a conducted duel was to be sealed and stored in the so-called widow's chest, a wrought iron safe with 3 independent locks, the keys to which were held by 3 different officials. Medical support and evidence concealment measures held a special place in duel logistics. A physician or surgeon who was a member of the order and had taken a specialized oath was required to arrive at the duel site. Medical care for duel participants was strictly regulated. The physician undertook to record any stab or gunshot wounds received in the duel in official medical reports as accidental domestic injuries sustained while cleaning personal weapons, or as a result of a fall from a horse during a hunt. Significant financial funds were allocated from a special lodge fund to pay for medical personnel and maintain secret infirmaries. According to the accounting books of the Charity Lodge in Lyon for 1784, under the item Unforeseen Expenses for Medical Assistance to the Brethren, 850 livres were spent in 1 calendar year, constituting about 15% of the organization's entire annual budget. In the event of a fatal duel outcome, the lodge undertook obligations for the secret evacuation of the body or the falsification of the medical conclusion regarding the cause of death, to protect the deceased's family from property confiscation and loss of rights, which inevitably followed participation in a duel prohibited by royal law. State intelligence services and law enforcement agencies of the 18th century were well aware of this parallel justice system and took active countermeasures. In Paris, the Lieutenant General of Police under Jean-Charles Pierre Lenoir deployed an extensive agent network infiltrated into the internal structures of Masonic lodges. Police informants, called flies, received payment ranging from 20 to 50 livres for each substantive written report on closed meetings and decisions of courts of honor. The Black Cabinet, a secret department of the French Postal Service that systematically conducted mail interception and decryption, played a huge role in the fight against secret societies. Between 1775 and 1789, Black Cabinet employees intercepted, copied, and deciphered over 1,200 letters and instructions belonging to the leadership of Masonic obediences. Upon discovering information about the preparation of a clandestine duel, the police applied preventive repressive measures. The detention of participants based on royal decrees without trial or investigation, followed by placement in the Bastille fortress or the Château de Vincennes, as well as the establishment of covert police surveillance over the seconds. A critical paleographic and source analysis of the surviving documents requires taking into account their origin, departmental affiliation, and the political context of the era. The historical corpus available to researchers is clearly divided into three groups: transcripts of police interrogations and judicial proceedings, internal journals of lodge meetings, architectural works, and the memoir literature of the participants. The interrogation transcripts, compiled by officers of the Royal Constabulary or judicial investigative commissions, bear the clear imprint of a political order. Under the influence of threats of torture, property confiscation, or indefinite imprisonment, the interrogated individuals were inclined to exaggerate the scale of the conspiracy, attribute anti-state goals to the lodges, and distort the actual circumstances of the duels. In these documents, the duel procedure was often deliberately interpreted as an element of an anti-government conspiracy or a ritualistic deprivation of life. In contrast, the internal journals of lodge meetings were subjected to the most severe internal censorship. Any mentions of duels that had taken place and conflicts between brothers were systematically expunged, replaced by allegorical euphemisms. The brother has temporarily suspended works in the temple. A delay arose in the architectural labors, or completely cut out of the bound books. A comparison of these two mutually exclusive sets of sources allows for the reconstruction of the real picture of the order's dueling practice only through cross-referencing dates, geographical locations, comparing names, and analyzing financial transactions in the cash books. A detailed audit of the causes of failures and the exposure of secret duels shows that in 80% of cases, the disclosure of information occurred due to the human factor, everyday carelessness, and logistical failures during the transportation of the wounded. As a characteristic example, one should consider the judicial case of the Three Crowns Lodge in Munich, dated 1783. A duel between two Bavarian officers, conducted with the sanction and under the control of the lodge leadership, ended with a severe gunshot wound to the abdominal area of one of the participants. The seconds, succumbing to panic, delivered the wounded officer to a civilian doctor not belonging to the order, offering him a large monetary reward of $300 for silence and covert treatment. However, the doctor, fearing criminal prosecution and the death penalty for harboring duelists, immediately reported the incoming patient to the Munich city police. As a result of a search conducted at the residence of the lodge master, the police seized not only the minutes of the secret dueling committee, but also the complete membership list of the organization, which included 112 individuals from among the highest nobility and state apparatus of Bavaria. This failure led to mass arrests, the dissolution of the lodge, the confiscation of its property, and amendments to Bavarian legislation. The analysis of this case revealed the main vulnerability of the closed structure, the absolute impossibility of fully controlling external institutions, civilian medicine, hired servants, carriage drivers, and accidental witnesses. The financial anatomy of Masonic lodges was closely intertwined with the system of ensuring secrecy and legal protection for members. Cash books and financial reports seized during searches testify to the existence of a special regular expenditure item called the Emergency Reserve Fund. These funds were formed through increased regular contributions upon initiation into the higher degrees of the order, as well as disciplinary fines imposed by the Court of Honor for various violations. The fund was used to organize emergency escapes for participants of illegal duels abroad, purchase forged travel documents, and pay lifelong pensions to the families of deceased participants. For example, After the liquidation and physical suppression of the Northern Friends Lodge in Berlin in 1786, the Prussian authorities confiscated a treasury amounting to 14,500 thalers. Of these, 4,000 thalers were held in a bill deposit at a Frankfurt bank, and were intended exclusively for financing the evacuation of order members who had come under investigation by the royal justice system. The procedure for confiscating property was strictly regulated by the state. Real estate, lodge buildings and land plots was sold at public auction. Silver and gold ritual utensils were melted down into coinage, and archival collections were transferred to the secret departments of the Ministries of Internal Affairs and Justice. The practice of closed Masonic duels and the functioning of courts of honor had a defining influence on the evolution of European law and military justice in the 19th century. The order's attempt to formalize, regulate, and limit violence within the privileged class led to the creation of codified dueling codes, adopted by the European nobility in the 19th century. The experience of Masonic mediation commissions and pre-trial dispute resolution was directly borrowed by state military structures. In 1808 in Prussia, then in 1812 in Austria, and in subsequent years in other European states, officer courts of honor were officially introduced, which fully adopted from the Masonic lodges the procedure of mandatory pre-trial reconciliation of the parties, strict rules for issuing challenges, and the regulation of duel conditions. During the first half of the 19th century, duels gradually transformed from a spontaneous and chaotic manifestation of violence into a strictly bureaucratized institutional ritual, and were eventually supplanted by the disciplinary charters of regular armies and state courts. The fate of the seized archives of the closed lodges of the 18th century reflects the dynamics of the political and social struggle of the era. During the French Revolution of 1789 to 1799, the majority of Masonic archives were confiscated by the Committee of Public Safety and merged with the collections of the National Library in Paris. In Austria, after Emperor Joseph II's decree of 1785 imposing strict restrictions on lodge activities, the documents were transferred to the archive of the secret police in Vienna, where they were stored under a top-secret classification. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, these archival collections were repeatedly relocated as a result of large-scale military conflicts. In particular, part of the archives of French, Belgian, and German Freemasonry ended up in the Special Archive of the USSR in Moscow after the end of World War II in 1945. Documentary evidence of the lodge's dueling practices, from transcripts of secret interrogations and decisions of courts of honor to encrypted challenges to duels, remains an invaluable primary source for modern historical science, allowing researchers to study the micropolitics of the 18th century, the mechanisms of transformation of the noble class, and the evolution of state institutions for controlling violence in society.